Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I want to respond today to a phenomena that is changing the world as we speak, but it is changing the world at the same time that the leaders of the United States are working overtime to deny this change, mostly by acting as if it weren't happening. Let me explain. The change that is going on is a reorganization of the world economy. For most of the last 75 years, since the end of World War II, the United States has been the dominant player in the world economy. It produced the most goods exported around the world. It brought in the most imports from around the world. The US currency, the dollar, was the global currency held by central banks in virtually every country as security, as collateral, you might say, for their own currencies. The American economy dominated also because the American military was the strongest in the world, and the political power of the United States was unrivaled at the time. Yes, there was the Soviet Union, but they were a very small player in the world economy compared to the United States. And while they had nuclear weapons, they had very much fewer of them and were in a much poorer situation to ever use them. So the dominance of the United States was as overwhelming as it has been with any empire, even if you go back to the earliest, the Greek, the Roman, and all the others. The United States was very rich at home, and it had not been destroyed by World War II the way all of our competitors pretty much had. Japan, Germany for sure, but also Britain, Russia, France. Nobody was in a position to question the United States. Indeed, as many of you know, the Marshall Plan of the United States, adopted after the end of World War II, saw the United States lend huge amounts of money to enable countries destroyed by the war to rebuild afterwards. And for most of the last 75 years, the United States has maintained that dominance. Lots of wars in lots of places were required. Lots of money to sustain this kind of an economic powerhouse was required. 700 or 800 military bases around the world exist to secure this economic dominance. And perhaps most important, American politicians, American academics, American mass media, and the American people in general got used to it. And of course, don't want to see it disappear. Unfortunately, it has. We are not anymore the richest economic player in the world economy. The dollar is steadily losing its dominant role to other currencies. Let me summarize it in one dramatic statistic. The United States, together with its major economic allies, Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, comprise something called these days the G7, the United States and its economic allies. The new player in the world economy, equal to, or as I'll show you in a moment, larger than the G7, is known as the BRICS, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the original five, to which 6 new ones were added a few months ago. The key player there, the People's Republic of China. So it's the United States and its allies the G7, and China and its allies, the BRICS. Each of those countries in both of those two groupings keeps a statistic called the gross domestic product. That's a measure of the total output of goods and services each country makes. If you add up the GDP of the United States and its allies, it works out to about 29% of the total output in a year of planet Earth. If side by side with that you put the GDP of the People's Republic of China and its allies in the BRICS, we're talking now about 33% of this planet's annual output. In other words, the BRICS have already surpassed the G7. They were roughly equal back in 2020. The gap between them is growing steadily in the BRICS' favor. This changes everything. What do I mean? Every country on Earth, when it used to have a need to borrow money, to sell bonds, to rearrange its trading arrangements, to solve its burning economic problems, would typically send a delegation of officials to New York or London or maybe one of the other capitals of the G7. Nowadays, when this is happening to many countries, especially in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, but increasingly in parts of Europe as well, there's an option that didn't exist for these countries before. They can go to Beijing or to New Delhi or fill in the blank. And those places can offer very big loans, often at cheap interest rates. They can buy what these countries have to sell. They can sell what these countries need to buy, and so on. Country after country is learning to play these two against each other, or if one of them offers better deals, which, by the way, the Chinese typically do, they go with them. And everything changes. It is childish and dangerous to pretend this isn't going on. Let me give you some examples of the pretending and then the suffering when the pretense is shown to be very dangerous. The United States made a decision with Britain to support Ukraine in fighting a war of attrition with Russia. That decision was made early in 2022. When that decision was made, public statements came from President Biden on down. The ruble would collapse. Russia would fall to its knees. Ukraine had a powerful army and would be given weapons and funding from the West. And that would be more than enough to destroy the enemy, Russia. As if to drive the point home, a package of sanctions were agreed. Russia was to be hobbled by having no place to sell its oil and gas because the Europeans would stop buying it. All of those calculations were 100% wrong. They made a terrible mistake. They didn't understand the BRICS. They didn't understand how big they were, how rich they were, and how Russia could and would turn successfully, especially to China and to India, to buy the oil and gas that Europe refused. That nullified the sanctions. To help Russia in countless other ways, that nullified the sanctions. Russia ruble did not collapse. Russian economy is stronger now than it was before the war began. This miscalculation has destroyed huge part of Ukraine, which will never be the same. It has recalibrated global politics in ways that will be with us for generations to come. The world was given a chance to witness how the world has changed. And no one, except perhaps a few Americans and a few of their G7 allies, they may still not see it. They may still be locked into a terrible denial. Here's more evidence. The Biden administration is talking about turning more and more to economic warfare. They didn't learn anything. You know what that's a polite term for? Sanctions. The United States is already the country that sanctions people in the world more than any other. China's not busy sanctioning. Russia isn't either. The United States, imagining itself to be the dominant power, is hitting everybody with sanctions. And guess what? It drives the sanctioned countries to say, okay, don't deal with the United States. If they're going to behave that way, let's reorient ourselves, you guessed it, to the BRICS, which is what's happening. You don't need to be a genius to understand that if one of the two blocks of the world economy is now bigger than the other, with the gap growing, if it has proven its willingness to stand together and support one of themselves, even in a frontal war with the United States and the G7, that we have a wholly new situation. We can try to bluff and bravado our way through. Listening to Janet Yellen go to China and wave her fingers and tell them how to behave after they've grown faster than the United States for every one of the last 30 years is laughable, except that it shows a denial of what is happening in the world and a phenomena in which the American leaders, Republican and Democrat alike, Biden and Trump together, keep talking as if their social role was to lead Americans into not facing the changed reality that is all around them. 143, I believe it's now 146 of the 195 countries in the UN have recognized Palestine. It's the same phenomena. And it's only becoming more clear. Don't be fooled by leaders who want to pretend they're leading something that isn't there anymore. No free world, no leadership of the free world. That nonsense is gone. And we will all be better off if and when we get leaders who understand it, who face it, and who present to the American people the new and different choices that have to be made to come to terms with the new global economic order, rather than tilting against windmills, as the old novel of Don Quixote laid it out. Caught up in a fantasy of a bygone world never was a recipe for success. If discussions like these strike you as valuable, please understand that they cost money to produce. If you can contribute something, please do. And the easiest way, go to our website, democracyatwork.info. And there you will find the ways to donate. Thank you.